Hi, I'm James from Chaosium. I sat down with Mike Mason, the creative director of Call of Cthulhu, and we talked about starting at level 1 inside TTRPGs. More specifically, Mike shared his perspective on what some of the interesting manipulations you can do to a character's power and starting experience and knowledge of a game when you're jumping into a new scenario or campaign. I started off the interview by getting Mike to explain exactly what level 1 meant, especially in the context of TTRPGs that don't necessarily have levels. Please subscribe to the Chaosium YouTube channel and enjoy the interview.
What is a starting level? Well, levels are, I guess, really well known in tabletop RPGs because they come from Dungeons and Dragons. And so everyone's very familiar with the concept of level advancement in your characters. Now, of course, we're going to completely break that now because Chaosium's basic roleplay system doesn't use levels. It's a completely different system of character progression and advancement. But I guess we'll refer back to levels as a common denominator of understanding. So, what is starting level? Well, we mean, I guess, a starting player character. The character that you have either just created and rolled up, or potentially a pre-generated character that's been given to you to play in the game you're about to enjoy. So I guess to sum it up, a newly created character never played before is a starting character at a starting level. And as I say, in Call of Cthulhu, there's no levels, and characters don't follow the same projection model in a game like D&D or many other kind of fantasy RPGs. In that Call of Cthulhu characters are kind of a mirror of the real world in that they play real people rather than barbarians and superheroes and that kind of thing. They play librarians and teachers and waitresses. And so their progression is based on their skills, which is the skills mechanic of BRP, basic role-playing, which Call of Cthulhu is built on. And not only that, though, but in Call of Cthulhu, it comes from the acquisition of knowledge, which could be Cthulhu mythos skill points, the acquisition of spells, the things you learn from tomes, and from the general kind of experience of interacting with the adventures. And in fact, the monsters of the Cthulhu mythos that we in the game called, getting used to the awfulness. But that's to sum up a starting level.
How does changing the starting level that you have for a character change the story or change how the game is going to work?
In a skill-based system like Call of Cthulhu, higher skill levels and or broader skills can give the character more agency and ability. The baseline being that higher skill percentages mean you're more likely to succeed when you're making a skill roll. So having a higher degree of experience in terms of skills means you're more likely to succeed because you've got bigger numbers to play with, basically. Having older, more experienced characters can also deepen their backstories and through that add further motivations to the character's concept. And that could be their personal motivations based on kind of experiences that you have built into their backstory when you designed them. It could be through the relationships that they have established in life. They may be married with a partner, have children, have a strange sort of job, or whatever it may be. But all these things can add, plot hooks essentially to your character, which a keeper is going to like because they're able to more easily draw you potentially into the plot of the story that you're going to be playing.
The title of this video is obviously why you should start at level 1. Well, that's the kind of concept we want to talk about. So what does that mean? And why is level 1 not necessarily the ideal place to start?
Most times it is. The most role-playing games, Call of Cthulhu included, Dungeons and Dragons, and many others I could call about, particularly, we're talking trad games that use a character progression system because the characters play for a potentially a longer narrative time rather than just a single session and then they're forgotten about. The game handles new investigators pretty well. It's a mystery-based game, and the concept is the investigators actually don't know much to start with. The idea being that as they play through scenarios or a campaign, they begin to accumulate this knowledge and they learn stuff. You know, they learn stuff about their character, they learn stuff about the plot and the wider world of the game. And in that sense, you know, they learn things that, you know, humanity was not meant to know. Clearly, this also works really well with new players who, you know, don't know anything about the Cthulhu mythos or Call of Cthulhu, you know, and so as if they're starting with a, you know, a new, you know, first level character in those terms, they learn as their character learns. And so the game world and the plots and the mysteries are revealed to them as they, you know, they play through in character. So it's a very accessible way to, you know, to learn the game. And it also means there isn't a massive barrier or high wall of entry to just get in and play the game. You know, there are some tabletop role-playing games that actually you kind of need to understand the game world before you really can really get into it properly. I mean, there's lots of ways you can introduce players into these things, but there are some very well-defined, you know, particularly fantasy-based game worlds, you know, for many different game systems that are very, you know, well-detailed. And so sometimes if you start playing in those, it can feel a bit of a challenge because you don't know everything. The beauty of Call of Cthulhu is it's based in the real world, so you already know everything you need to know. Even if it's a 1920s or a Dark Ages setting, you're still dealing with basic humans in basic human situations. And we all have a rough idea of, you know, the roaring 20s and prohibition and gangsters and you know, knights and castles and riding around on horseback. So we get a very quick sense of place, which allows you to then just get into the game. And from there, we're good to go because we can learn everything else we need to know as we play through the game.
So can you start a character off as too experienced? Is there a set of other levels you'd recommend, so to speak?
Personally, I don't think you can ever have a character too experienced in a game, particularly in a game like Call of Cthulhu. Now, that may not be true for some other games where a higher level of experience means a lot more agency and ability of the character, and they may just tear through the scenario potentially. But again, that's about game balance and the mechanics of the system you're using. But I'm just going to be talking about Call of Cthulhu here. So I have no problem if for a particular scenario or campaign, we want to create a set of characters that aren't first level or starting characters in the traditional sense of the game, and we want to create far more experienced and capable characters. I have no issue with that. I think that's a kind of a discussion that you can have, you know, up front in your, you know, session 0, or however you want to term it, your kind of setup session where you're talking about what you're going to play, the kind of things you want out of the game, and the character concepts you're going to kind of build together. So, yeah, as I say, I think Call of Cthulhu works just fine with, you know, what you might call basic characters and experienced characters. And in fact, you know, we kind of wrote this into the system, and so it allows for it already. There are actually a number of ways in Call of Cthulhu that you can find today in your books that that tell you how to do this. If you can obviously use the standard character creation model, which basically creates a basic starting character with moderate experience, because everyone starts with some. And even in that, you as a player get to choose the age of your character. It's not random unless you want it to be. And so depending on the age of your character, you already have in the basic system of Call of Cthulhu a ways to immediately get more skill points and experience. Because if you choose to play an older character, you get what we call improvement education checks. So that means if you're playing a character in their 40s, you get to make 2 improvement checks. If you're playing a character in their 80s, you get to make 4. And what that actually means is you roll, 2 or 4 times, your education. And if you roll greater than your education, you actually get more skill points to spend in character generation because your character is older and is more experienced. So that's inbuilt into the basic core system already. Now, the other option is to play what we call experienced investigators. And again, this is now an optional rule that you can find in the Investigator's Handbook. It's in fact on page 61. And there's a set of kind of generic experience packages that can apply to pretty much all Call of Cthulhu settings, such as war experience or police experience or medical experience. There's even a mythos experience package if you want to play a character that already has some insight into the Cthulhu mythos. These are kind of an optional package that you can agree as a group that you want to embrace and use. And they grant more experience to that starting character, which basically translates into more skill points and other experience benefits, such as the medical experience allows you to, you're not going to take sanity loss by seeing horrific injuries because you're used to it, because you're a doctor, you've been through that. There are some downsides, such as an increase in age and maybe some sanity loss. But effectively, that's the flip side of being experienced. Yeah, you've got better skills, but you've also lived a bit more. And there's a downside to that sometimes. So that's the other kind of key way of building an experienced character in Call of Cthulhu. Of course, there is a third option as well, if you want to go down the Pulp Cthulhu route, which actually the whole basis of that is because you're creating pulp heroes rather than Call of Cthulhu investigators, you actually by default create a more able, higher ability character to engage in the game, because the setup is that you're playing these kind of slightly larger than life heroes in this kind of, pulpy version of Call of Cthulhu. So that's a very easy way. If you want to play kind of slightly more powered characters, Pulp Cthulhu provides you that to do that. And in fact, there are levels even within Pulp in terms of the level of kind of Pulp and experience you want to employ in the game that you can adjust. So that's your three ways, built into the rules, optional experienced investigators in the Investigator Handbook, and Pulp Cthulhu.
What about pre-generated characters? Can you talk a little bit about how they fit into everything?
If you're buying a pre-written scenario, a source book or a campaign, from Chaosium and the Miskatonic repositories sometimes, a lot of these come with pre-generated characters that are particularly geared to the scenario, campaign, or setting. Starter characters who are more or less at the base level, but maybe they've got a few little extras just to kind of make them fit the scenario or the setting in a particular way. So that's another way. There is one other thing to be aware of, is that with pre-generated characters in scenarios, often the advice and guidance in the scenario is to actually allow the players to some bonus skill points to spend as they wish on these pre-made characters, to kind of customize them a little bit more to how the player wants them to be. So that might be granting an additional 50 skill points, may even be 100. It really varies, but effectively allows the player to mark out those extra skill points into any skills they wish, within reason and with the agreement of the keeper. And there's nothing to stop you doing that anytime you wish. So if you've got a bunch of characters and you've all rolled up using the standard basic system, and you think, actually, I would like them to be a little bit more experienced, but I don't want to make it hard. I just want to make it really easy. Well, you can just say to all the players, actually, well done designing your characters. They all look great, but I want to give you an extra 50 skill points because I want them to be a little bit more experienced for this particular scenario. So here's 50 points, spend them on these skills, or you may direct them in a certain way. You want to say, I want to ensure that you've all had some experience with swimming or diving lessons or driving lessons. So therefore I want you to spend at least 30 points in driving or diving or swimming. You can direct the characters to kind of fill in a bit of backstory. Say prior to the scenario, you all went on a training course and now you can all speak Latin, whatever it may be. that will help the scenario run more smoothly, but it gives the players a little bit extra, it gives them a little bit of a bonus as well. Of course, some books like Berlin, the Wicked City actually have tailored investigator experience packages for the particular setting. So Berlin, for example, has a Street Fighter package and a kind of former reporter package that are very geared to the to the setting, to the era that the book is set in. So yeah, all these things provide a lot of choices for players and keepers.
Do you have any particular tips for keepers who are going to be running a game where they have experienced characters? Is there anything that they're going to be able to do better or in a more exciting way?
Although Call of Cthulhu is not designed to be balanced in terms of monster levels and character levels, it's a horror game, so monsters are meant to be monstrous and unbeatable sometimes. But knowing that you have more capable and experienced investigators means that the keeper can choose to increase the capabilities of the villains, the cultists, the cult leaders, to be more formidable adversaries. Obviously, you don't want the investigators to just breeze through the enemies in that way. We want to make them actually enemies, good adversaries. And likewise with the monsters. Although monsters are already pretty capable anyway, there's not a great deal. There's not a great need to alter them. For example, a ghoul with 3 attacks is still a pretty formidable opponent, even against an experienced investigator. The game is set up in this way. However, higher skills just means that the investigators are more likely to succeed in their skill checks. So the progression of the story and plot may actually be a little smoother or easier in that way. Of course, this is a really good point to then say, be careful and think about when you ask for skill rolls. Even though the characters may have higher skills, that doesn't mean they're going to make them. It doesn't mean they're going to fail. It doesn't mean they're going to succeed every time they roll. Just because they have an 80% in something, they can still fail. Which comes back to a golden rule for Call of Cthulhu, is that only ask for skill rolls when they're appropriate and dramatic. Don't ask for just run-of-the-mill things, and only ask for a roll when you know the outcome if you fail and if you pass. And no skill roll in most cases should be a complete roadblock in some way. And I will refer everyone back to the Keeper rulebook and to look in the running the game chapter at obvious and obscured clues, because they are the key here in terms of understanding when and if to call for a particular skill roll in the game.
In terms of experienced character gameplay mechanics like high Cthulhu mythos or very high skills or very low sanity, do you have any tips of exciting ways that you can dive into the Cthulhu game system a little deeper to bring those elements forward?
With Call of Cthulhu, it's all about the story. So your characters being, very skilled, maybe got high Cthulhu mythos, lower sanity, as you say. It's about what that is doing to their characters. It's about, how does that now change the plot of the scenarios that you're playing? That they can walk into a scenario like The Haunting and quickly kind of identify what's going on, perhaps. But what does that mean? What does that mean to their characters? How do we make that more compelling for the player, in a sense, is the question you're asking. And so it's all about building those hooks into the player characters now. It's like, what they're low on sanity. What does that mean? That means they understand the mythos more. So is there now temptations you can build in to make them think about using the mythos to their own ends? Perhaps they start out very innocently about, well, if we cast this spell, it will help the monster be banished. But in doing it, we have to, do something horrible. How far can you get the player characters to step over the line so actually they lose all their sanity and become cultists? and therefore, kind of the keeper wins the game in a way. It's these kind of temptations, these moral questions. How does a character stay steadfast, even despite the easy road? It's making the choice. Do they make a good choice, or do they take the easy choice? And that's the kind of challenges you want to start thinking about in terms of presenting to those more experienced characters. And don't forget, a character with 90 to 100% in many skills is still going to get eaten by a ghoul 80% of the time. That it's just a case of looking at what the parts you have to play with, and using them in an intelligent, creative way. Okay, the group can handle a bunch of deep ones potentially relatively easily if they're all geared up and they're all got high skills in firearms and fighting or hiding. But just a single dark young wandering in is going to be a challenge still. And I don't just mean in combat terms. The combat is one aspect if you want to go that road, but in terms of magic and the effect of the mythos and those moral kind of questions, they're all things you can play with in those kind of higher, more experienced kind of level games.
I think one of the things that makes starting experience really interesting in Call of Cthulhu is that the purpose of the game is not necessarily to build in power. It's a lot about your character's descent into madness and their eventual death. Can you talk about how the different goals of Call of Cthulhu affects the starting level that you should jump into the game with?
Part of the enjoyment of play comes from the hope that your character will survive and improve. That's one of the kind of things, one of the fringe benefits of role-playing games is you're looking to develop your character in some way. Not all the time, but often. Even if that improvement is paralleled by the investigator's decline through the experience of the mythos and the acquisition of mythos lore, it's a fun balance, particularly in Call of Cthulhu, because for every gain, there's often a downside. It's a very balanced mechanic in terms of character progression in Call of Cthulhu. Many other games don't have that balance and check. They just allow you to improve and you get better, and there's no downside. And so you end up creating these very almost superheroic characters in terms of being able to do anything. Call of Cthulhu is still based in that reality that we're still playing human, frail characters. Their hit points don't go up. They have a capacity to diminish in terms of their sanity and the kind of backstory details. It can be corrupted and so forth. These are all kind of balances, in a sense, to the character getting better in other fields of their, on their character sheet. So that's why Call of Cthulhu always, for me, is a really interesting kind of concept around character progression. It's not just, everything is good. It's everything is good. Oh, but that's a bit bad too. It's always this constant balance, and something to bear in mind when you are, running a game.
That's some great advice. If you had to sum up the feedback you have for people about how they can best involve and manipulate the player level in their game in the most effective way, what would it be? What's the summary of all of this?
Like most things in life, give it a go and try it out and see if it feels right for you. At the end of the day, the game is yours. It's a toolkit for you to use to design the game you want to play. So decide what level of experience might suit the scenario you want to run, and then talk to your players about it. Discuss, are they happy to play more experienced characters? Most players are going to go yes, because they think it's a good thing. Look at the mechanics and the options, that I've talked about in the Investigator Handbook and so on, and use those kind of option rules, or ignore them, and just give people some extra skill points and see how it plays out. Try it out a few different ways. Try out pulp if you're not sure whether you like it or not, but give it a go. Find the level of game that works for you. And it may be after doing all that, you come back to just saying, actually, just creating standard starting basic characters is what what works for us best. We like that sense of progression upwards from there. And that's just great because that's what the majority of people do. However, these extras are there for you to play with, to tweak, and to make your own. So give them a go and make the game work for you.